Hey, I'm great. You know, I got my Mohanlal shirt on. I wanted to make sure that I was representing the wonderful style that he portrayed in this movie, which, especially after coming from Drishyam and Drishyam 2, you know, everything was pretty understated. You had already told me, like, you got to see some of his other movies, and I'm glad it was this one because the way, man, I miss the 90s, and I wanted to represent. So I'm good because I'm feeling this. How are you?
I'm doing great, man, because we're reviewing today Manichitrathazhu. Definitely one of the hardest names to say for any of the movies. But I got to say, man, speaking of Mohanlal's wardrobe, I have to ask you if you have anything like this in your closet.
Woo! No, not as yet. Not as yet. No. And you might think all Americans would have something like that. And I'm sure I have at some point in my days. I'm certain that I have. But this one in particular, and then one of the other ones that I think literally just said the shirt. Where like it was some of the greatest, like, thank you for being that. Because at that time in the 90s, if you were in America, which he was, that is absolutely the type of stuff you were wearing. That was everywhere here. And I'm so glad that the film was really representative of that, because it seems nuts just looking at it now, but it was the style. It was the thing.
Wow.
And yeah. And I'm really glad that it showcased that.
I mean, that's a pretty good level of detail. Like, I mean, like, they were definitely like, his wardrobe was out of this world for a lot of the shirts he was wearing. And even the first scene we see him in, whatever he's wearing in that getup looks crazy. But in terms of, like, I didn't know he was accurate like that. That's pretty cool that it's and here it is. It's verified right here from Doug, the American.
Doug's stamp of approval actually happened in America.
But man, this was a hell of a movie. This was a crazy one. And I was really, really fascinated to get your take on this, because, you know, the movies we have reviewed so far have been, I would say, more modern. Yeah. And for us, as it is, you know, Hollywood fans and from sort of a foreign sort of audience compared to what we're watching, at least this movie that felt a bit more familiar with Drishyams and Joji's. This movie took us to a whole different world, I feel, because it's definitely the oldest movie we reviewed. But I want to start with your general impression, man. What was your first take from this movie? What really left you?
I'll try to break it down into kind of like a 3-part structure of how I enjoyed the film. Because as you know, and I'll let you know, viewers, sometimes I have to watch movies in parts just due to the fact that I take care of my daughter mostly, and I work a lot at night doing audiobooks and stuff. So I had to watch it in 3 chunks. And the first chunk, and I told Amit this, was the beginning of the movie up until the point that it kind of reveals that the ghost story that may have been going on in the house. And then the second chunk was all the way up until right before we got the reveal of who was actually being possessed or who was being afflicted. And then the third chunk brought us to the conclusion. The first part of the movie, it started a little slower. There was a little bit of goofiness in there, and it kind of was, it was vacillating between so many different things that I was really interested in and enjoy. A little bit of thrill, a little bit of comedy, all of that was there, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what the movie was going to be. Still was enjoying myself, and I divorced myself entirely from like production value and music, because this was 93 in an industry that wasn't funded by Hollywood, right? In 93, we got Jurassic Park, but this is not Hollywood, and this is not Steven Spielberg, and I still was engaged. I just didn't know exactly what I was watching. To stop where I did with that second part broke my heart, because I was so invested at that point and really wanted to know what was going to happen. And when the shoe drops in that third act, all the way at the end, I was like, yes, because we had talked right before the show. I think all the seeds for how much this industry understands about the language of cinema and showing us what we need to see in a frame and how we need to see powerhouse performances really sell something that contains a supernatural element was spectacular. And for the time and place in which it was made, it was executed beautifully. Little slow in the beginning. Slow isn't the right word. I'd say a little bit disconnected in the beginning, but by the time Mohanlal shows up, we really just ramp further and further and further up the scale from there. And I was just entranced by the experience. So how about you?
Yeah, so interesting for me, like I have sort of familiarity with the story because I have actually seen a remake of this movie from Bollywood well before I even knew about the Malayalam film industry. So it was kind of maybe 10, 15 years ago, whenever the Bhul Bhulaiya movie came out, which is the remake. So I had already sort of knew sort of the beats. I sort of knew the twist, if you want to call it that, of the story. But obviously I knew that, this is the original. This is the source. This movie has been remade like 5 times or something like that. So I wanted to see what it was like. But what you mentioned about sort of the industry and sort of what this movie establishes, all the foundations are right here in what they're doing, right? Like it's basically what they're doing in this movie is what they've carried through in current cinema, like a dedication to writing, a dedication to supreme performances that are really the highlights. Even till today, not much reliance on things like CGI or things like that. It's all sort of there right now as it was back then. So you are right. Like the pacing is a little bit, I would say, slow. And even if I compare it to some of the other adaptations, I think those movies are a little bit more fast paced. But I think it's more of a product to its time. Your point is exactly right. You can't think of 93 like Hollywood 93. In fact, this movie felt more like something from Hollywood from like late 80s, early 80s, maybe the 80s period, something like that, because it's obviously the industry's, would have just started coming up. Obviously, money is a big factor. Like, it doesn't have the budgets of a Jurassic Park at all. But yeah, the starting was good. It was interesting to me. Like, it was really, as you said, a bit goofy, a lot of sort of comedy, and there was a lot of comedy intertwined with this movie, which I really enjoyed and was actually surprised by a little bit too.
By the time it kind of gets revealed who the uncle is and what he's really trying to do, because we just kind of follow him on that early journey where he's worried about the chair creaking, and he thinks that there are the ghosts, and he, is constantly beleaguered by a chicken in a bucket or a cat, being underneath a basket or any of those things. And at one point I was like, oh man, this movie is really smart because it's constantly telling us that it may not be actually supernatural.
Yes.
Because every single thing that happens has a reasonable occurrence right behind it. And that prevails all the way into the end. Spoilers if you haven't seen the movie from 93, but I hadn't, so there's your warning. Yeah. It just, by the time I kind of understood that he was there as our comic relief, I really started to appreciate his character and what he was offering to the story. I was just a little confused because I thought he was who we were following at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So as we have that really fun, goofy bit where he's leaving with the items that he needs to tie in the house, but he can't speak the words, right? And then his wife has the exact same thing and they can't speak, and oh no, is something wrong with you? Like, that was all fun and well and good, but it is not indicative of what the movie eventually becomes.
Yeah.
So when we get into that second and third act and you really understand what it is, it's amazing. But again, like you said, the seeds for everything we see now, uncomparable storytelling, uncomparable performances, and uncommon dedication to the craft is all there. And I could see why so many people suggested it to us for so long, because it's wonderful.
Definitely. It's interesting you mentioned that because so the actor that played the comedic relief, his name is Innocent, and he actually passed away recently. So nice little homage. We can special thanks to you, Innocent, for your performance in this as I sort of do. But yeah, it's interesting in this movie how sort of when you mentioned that, I thought of how well this movie sort of plays with protagonists and how it sort of juggles them around. Right, we don't start off with Mohanlal, who you would think would be the protagonist, in this sort of when you look at the cast, you're like, wow, it's got Mohanlal, who's going to be there from the start, carry this movie. No, it's sort of some comedic relief at the start. Then we get transferred over to Nakulan, essentially, like his sort of story and what he's going through with his wife and all that stuff. Then Mohanlal comes in, and at the end, it's someone else altogether. Obviously, the dancer, the phenomenal performance, which we'll get to. Obviously as well. So it does a great job of just sort of shifting that sort of narrative around quite well, which honestly I've not seen all that much. Or I can't think of any examples too much like that, to be honest.
I think that's much more common in books, right? Like you you don't necessarily see that so much in cinema. Like we're following, let's keep Jurassic Park as the example. We are following Alan Grant the entire time, right?
Yeah.
And occasionally we shift over to seeing things from other characters' perspectives, but who we really follow is Alan Grant and a little bit of John Hammond. But here it was like, okay, this is our main character now, and this is our main character now, and this is our main character now. And luckily it all congeals very well, especially by the end of the film. But that was pretty much one of my only gripes. And then my other gripe was not necessarily a gripe, more an observation, which is that another thing in America in the 90s was that psychiatry was considered voodoo of the mind. And, you know, it was looked at as very much like quacks, right? Like the word quack was still very much associated with a psychiatrist. And now we know, like, oh, mental health is very important. And these psychological ailments and these diseases and, you know, actual misfiring connections in the brain can actually be pointed to very specific conditions.
Yep.
And I won't fault the movie for utilizing psychiatry as a device to tell this story, because in America, we would have done the exact same thing. And we did. And I'm sure we'll get to some of those examples a little bit later on. But I'm curious, in that remake that you watched, was it still the same thing? Did they handle psychiatry the same way?
Yeah, it was interesting coming to think of it, because like, I can't remember too many details specifically around that, but I do know from one thing that this movie did in comparison to that movie, they both play on the element of, I guess, you know, is this a spirit possession, or is it a psychological issue that's going on? They sort of play with that concept pretty well, and there's no really definite answer. It's more like an open interpretation as to what you kind of want to believe. At least that's the way I feel about it. Like, it could have gone either way. Like, was she actually possessed, or was it just a split personality? I think that plays on that. I think this movie does a bit better job than that movie does. I think in that movie, they sort of put the psychology a little bit to the side, and it's more about possession, actually. So it's not spoken about as much, which is surprising, considering the time
that makes
now.
me enjoy this movie even more.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it had the guts to exist as a film that, if it was made today, it would all be supernatural. It would be, you know, those franchises that we get in Hollywood with Insidious and things like that, and it would be exploded, and it would be all over the place, and you know, there would be a sequel tomorrow, and it would be somebody else who's the dancer now. And I love that it was a definitive cut and dry at the end. And again, if you haven't seen it, you know, spoilers, but I really appreciated that about the movie. Like, nope, this is what is happening. Here's how I'm going to try to fix it. And if it doesn't work, here are the consequences everybody needs to be prepared to accept.
Yeah.
Loved that. Loved it.
No, I think one thing that was quite different, like the remake, at least the one I've seen, because there's a version in the Kannada industry, there's a version in the Tamil industry, there's a version in the Telugu industry. I think from what I understand, like the Bollywood one, they bring the priest character in much earlier to the story. So in this movie, he's brought in at the end, but in the Bollywood one, at least, they bring him in much earlier. So it becomes like his presence, just being there alone, makes it become more of a spiritual piece. And that side, whereas this one, he's brought in at the end, you know, and that's already been established. Like Mohanlal's already done the work for letting us know that this is psychological and it could be something else, but either way, this is a problem, you know? So I think they handled that really well. So it's a good conversation on, you know, we have talked about a little bit about the production, but, you know, we can talk about it a little bit more in terms of this whole, I think the horror genre, obviously we're familiar with horror quite a bit more. And you mentioned, you know, Insidious, like I thought Paranormal Activity, like those kind of movies, you know,
it's a great example.
Do that kind of thing. Like something's possessed and it's over the top, it's wild, it's crazy. Obviously this movie stays very rooted in culture with, you know, its sort of style and sort of what's happening with the tantric stuff and obviously the dancing later on. Also some historical pieces with going back in the past and all that stuff. So interesting. But what do you think about the horror genre being portrayed like this, like how they were showing it? You know, what techniques they were using and stuff like that. The music and score together were interesting because obviously there was sound, like there was music itself, there were songs that were just there, which were, you know, what do you think about them? And then obviously there's a score with the sound of, you know, the anklets, which I thought was a great device. But
it's great.
What do you think, man, overall?
Well, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I particularly enjoyed that aspect of it. because I told you before we even recorded, it reminded me very much of like John Carpenter and early Sam Raimi. So again, to kind of echo your point, it didn't necessarily feel exactly like a 90s America movie. It felt more like an early or late 80s. But again, a lot of that could have to do with the equipment that was available and people kind of learning from the films that were available to them, you know? So it could have just been a few years behind in terms of the industry, and who cares? Because the story was great.
Yeah.
I loved the music. I loved the anklets, and specifically those shots coming down the hallway. Or I'll give you two other examples that were like really effective and thrilling. A 12-year-old me would have been terrified, right? But, 36-year-old me is like, that was a really cool shot. But anytime we were going down the hallway with the anklets and the camera was kind of juddering along with the movement, but specifically when they went into the room for the first time after it had been opened, and they were trying to, redo the rituals. And then we get the shots of the hand, and we get the people falling down the stairs, and we get the kind of, zooming in and zooming back out. Like, that was super effective and super well done. But the other scene that just blew my mind in terms of how well it was executed was the dance at the end.
Yeah.
And specifically the way Mohanlal and the other two characters that are present at the time observe the dance, and how unhinged the performance is, juxtaposed with once the other man, the guy staying in the other house, joins the frame, how it becomes this beautiful, elaborate dance sequence between the two of them in her mind, and then comes back and you just see a terrified man while somebody is dancing at him as he's trying to lead her down a hallway. Which I'll get into one of my main comparisons. Something that is very similar to that happened recently was in The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. And even if you don't like horror, that show has something for everyone. It is phenomenal. Phenomenal. And it's a one and done. It's great. But there is a sequence where one of the main characters is called back into the house, and she's dancing. And in her mind, she's dancing with her dead husband. She's dancing with her family and her friends. And then it would cut back, and you just see her dancing alone in this broken down home. And it goes back and forth and back and forth until the inevitable conclusion. I won't spoil that show if you haven't seen it. If you like horror, watch it. If you don't like horror, watch it, but close your eyes sometimes. But this scene was so reminiscent of that I was shocked at how well it was executed. It was entrancing. It was engrossing. One of my favorite things that I've seen from this entire industry of the films that we've watched thus far, just because of how wonderful it was executed. Again, our production value is low, but in that setting, it doesn't matter because it's all about the performance, and it's all about how well those cuts are made. And it was staggering and horrifying.
Yeah. Definitely. It's a different take on horror. Like, Sam Raimi is definitely a good one. I thought of Sam Raimi more because Sam Raimi did a good job of intertwining comedy into his horror a lot of the time. And that's what this movie aimed to do and did pretty effectively at times. Like, there'll be even times when, like, everything's going along and they bring back the one of the Swamijis who's been possessed or something like that, and he's Mohanlal's having a fun time with him, and he's jumping over the water.
Don't you step on the water.
Yeah, they had some of that, but like, I think the some of the beats were quite similar to me from a lot of older Hitchcock, I thought. So going back even further in the 60s,
absolutely,
with the music and Psycho, and obviously, he was known for psychological horrors, and this is definitely, if it's in any category, it's a psychological horror. But again, another scene that I really liked in terms of the production was the one where it's the younger girl. I can't find her name here, but she's a younger girl, Nali, I think, who's going to get married to the boy next door.
The guy staying in the other house.
And then she spills something, and then the ghost basically follows her into a room and locks it.
Locks it.
Yeah. So some great sort of, the camera work again, it's so great. It's just following slowly and slowly. It's also great to see the two worlds, when there's another scene with, I think it's a poisoned one where there's a bottle of poison and Mohanlal sees it and he runs to, save. Yeah. Just some of the long shots they're doing while they're sort of running backwards. It's creatively done, I thought. They had a lot of really good techniques which just sort of kept you engaged, and really, a lot of the techniques they used, I wouldn't think of them as old. They felt like very sort of modern and current. It's just obviously,
timeless,
print.
timeless techniques.
Correct. Yeah,
they're things that Hitchcock would have used, which are things that Spielberg would use today, which are things that J.J. Abrams would use. That's what I think. That's when I think the movie became truly most effective for me. When it really just let it be, here's a powerhouse performance that is going to show you how absolutely twisted someone can be in their mind, which again, modern psychology would probably say, well, we can't necessarily go directly to that extent, to the point where you actually know every word of a song in a foreign language and every move to a dance that you've never seen. Whatever, you suspend your disbelief. That's what we're here to do in a movie. Okay. So I don't care about any of that stuff, even though those thoughts popped into my mind, because it's fun. It's engaging. And up until that moment where it was kind of revealed, like, no, this is just psychosis, I did kind of want there to be a will it, won't it for supernatural or not. But again, I really champion the movie's decision to stay and stick with its guns, say what this is, because then we know definitively Mohanlal is our hero, which, in the other remake that you talked about, the priest being introduced earlier on, well, then we're talking more exorcist. And then the exorcist, the priest is either the hero or the fallen hero. So I loved that Mohanlal played this character the way that he did, kind of crazy, just immediately throwing smoke screens up in everybody's face so that they had no idea what he was really doing.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff works out a little bit later on, and you get this sense of like, wow, did he really do that the whole time? Including what he did with the middle sister, Sridevi? Was that her name?
Yep. Sridevi, yep.
Spectacular.
Oh, yeah, she was great.
Because you see that scene where he picks her up and throws her over the shoulder. And at that point, you still think it may be her. And he runs her into the room and throws her in there, and she plays it so well. Then he goes in and talks to her, and she calms down. And we later learn he had set her up to do that the whole time. Again, not a twist, but more of a reveal of a grand plan. Excellent. And I'm sorry, I just reacted a little bit strange. I think a firework just went off outside my house.
Celebrations.
No,
but it's interesting, man. Like, it's a great point and a pretty good segue into sort of talking more about sort of the plot and stuff like that, because we've covered it in bits and pieces here, with some of the pacing stuff and some of the revelations. For me, of course, as I said, it was a bit different because I already sort of knew the story. Again, I'd seen this movie, the remake, 10, 12, 15 years ago, but the story was so good that it was just, locked in my memory, because of that. And a lot of the credit has to go to, this is the original source. So, this is where it all came from. The other adaptations all had this to lean on, whether it's Mohanlal's performance, whether it's the direction from Fazil, whether it's the dancing performance from Shobita at the end. Shobana at the end. But in terms of the plot, man, in terms of when Mohanlal sort of picks it up, how did you find sort of that integration into this whole story? Because like for me, obviously, I didn't know the twist. Now, I knew the twist, but were you playing that game of who is possessed, and did you think that Sridevi was actually like the culprit for this? Or because there were some scenes which are like when she's in the room with Mohanlal, Dr. Sunny, of course, Sunny makes an appearance in this episode, in the room with the upstairs room, and he's playing with all the jewelry, and he's showing. I could tell that she was like more than interested, like she was almost
just really getting into it.
Yeah. But did you be surprised at the end when they revealed that it's all to do with it was actually
No,
Ganga?
That is honestly one of the things that I feel like the movie handled poorly, but I wonder if that's just my perspective as a 36-year-old person who's watched more movies than he ever should have watched, right? Because I constantly kept telling you, and I mentioned it, twice already, I think. This would have been the movie that I would have picked up from Blockbuster when I was 12 years old and been like, oh, look at this cool cover. I should probably rent this without my parents knowing. And then, going and watching it in the dark with a couple friends over, and probably at the end of the movie being like, that wasn't scary, right? I'm going to sleep with the night on tonight. So 12-year-old me probably would have seen the movie and thought that it was her the entire time. Sridevi, right? Like, absolutely. But every time she was being accused, I didn't think that her performance was unhinged or that there was anything to point to her whatsoever. So I knew pretty early on that it must be some sort of affectation, or somebody was pointing it that way, or, where this is now going to be a scapegoat of sorts. But it was pretty immediately apparent to me that it was going to be who it was, because those anklets, just like with Boba Fett's spurs, we heard them, right in the beginning of the movie, when they were walking the grounds, and then it was revealed that, who was staying there the night before? Well, it was man and wife, and it happens to be our two other main characters, right? So right then and there, I kind of knew, well, it has to be this person, or she has to be responsible, and if she's responsible, then it has to be afflicting her. It couldn't be anybody else, because why would it? And then there was another scene later on where she was wearing the anklets, and there was a point made of you understanding that the sound was connected to her. So no. And then the other thing that I thought the movie could have done a little bit better was with the character that Mohanlal was constantly confronting, why are you doing this? And what are you doing hanging around here? And, he kind of sets him up at the end of the movie as being like, thanks for your help. But it seems to me like there may have been another draft of the movie where his character was a little bit more important to revealing something more to Sonny about what the affliction was, or the extent of the affliction was. Because really all we get from him is the anklets that he has in his pocket at the one point.
Yes.
But that's, that's a minor gripe. Long way to answer your question. No, I wasn't surprised. Still delighted.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was definitely, even when I watched it for the first time, I was pretty sure that the person that plays Sri Devi in the other adaptations as well was not the person, and it was kind of a setup, because just, how they were showing the two. If you compare the way that they showed Ganga and they showed Sri Devi, they were completely different. Like, I mean, again, great work from the production, because they do have some scenes which are well done. Like, I think it's the one where she's, like the first time when they find out that it's, when they don't find out, they sort of let it be known that Sri Devi is the one that's possessed. There's sort of, the uncle goes and he sees her talking crazy, and it's just like, she has a very strange face. She's swinging on the chair, and they're like, "Yeah, you're crazy."
Yeah. And those are the really cool, film tricks that I think are really nice. So every time we had seen her previous to that, everything was shot, in a pretty standard, typical way. Yeah. But then that moment, we stay with her a little bit too long. We look at her face a little bit more than we typically had. So those are just amazing tricks that you can play on somebody's mind to be like, uh-oh, what did you miss?
Yep.
And it worked a little bit, there may have been 5-10 minutes where I was like, really, is it this person? But ultimately, every time she had been on screen, especially after that, the one scene where she's like, what is it? What's wrong? And everyone is just staring at her. Like, what is it? What's wrong? What is it? What's wrong? That was the moment I knew, like, it can't be her. It can't be her.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to go back and watch, especially in that scene. And then later on where Ganga is talking about the fact that she had heard Sri Devi saying that she was going to be elsewhere. Like, where was she in all those scenes? Because by the end, we know that it's kind of, I hate to say this, but it's almost like lycanthropy, like her psychosis manifests itself at night, right?
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting to go back and watch those scenes and kind of see where it is. But the most effective use of that was absolutely, unequivocally, when Mohanlal goes into the room and he can hear her dancing behind the door. And we have that entire scene of him putting on all of the trappings of the nobleman, and confronting her as the nobleman character. And that, until we get to the third act, had been my favorite moment of like, there's tangible physical proof that something is going on. And it's like, we mean it. And his performance in that scene is wonderful. And the way that the door is kind of pushing out was really effective and really kind of staggering, right? Like, it just plants you firmly in that moment of like, oh, is this really happening? Is there going to be a ghost in this movie? And I love that it did that to me. I love that as that 36-year-old man that knew that there must be somebody involved other than the person the film was setting us up, didn't know at that moment if I was right or not about what might happen. That was great. And that's rare for me.
Yeah, no, I think what the movie does is, when you mentioned that, I would say it's a bit more of a slow paced movie, or it just takes its time to tell us a story. I would say the moments it has throughout each of the parts are pretty memorable. Like we mentioned the first one at the start, when the three men enter the possessed room for the first time, and we have the whole a few of them are falling down, and really funny. There's one character who I don't think gets too much mentioned, but he's always running away whenever there's any scene of anything scary. So he runs away straight away. there's that one scene, and then there's one you just mentioned then, which is, the door being trapped, and there's the one with Sridevi and the Mohanlal confrontation, and all that is before the final end one. So that specific moments are like, that's pretty memorable, and so is that, and so is that, and so is that. So I can't tell you the story from start to finish. I can tell you those moments. Exactly, like this is the scene here, and that's a big scene there. There's a scene with the confrontation. So I think they do a good job of just playing that. So I never felt it boring because of those moments. Like something would just happen. I'd be like, oh wait, what's happening now? In between sort of the a lot of times sort of the exposition and whatever else was sort of going on. It did sort of let us have some moments where you could be like, okay, this is a pretty cool scene. Break. That's not what's happening. Go to another scene. Another big scene happened. So I think they did that pretty well to keep it engaging enough to sort of get you through the entire movie without feeling ever like it's super boring or super dull.
Oh, absolutely.
It had that moments where it could have been like, this is going a bit too slow. I need something to happen. And then something would happen, So it plays on that really well, but a pretty good transition into sort of, I guess, some of the end point. I guess I want to get your point on sort of how this whole movie sort of ended, the climax scene, obviously the dancing and all that stuff, man. That's probably, like I say, the last half an hour in this movie. You have to wait for it, but when it comes around, boy, is it worth it?
Oh yeah,
man.
I mean, for several reasons, right? Like,
yeah.
So I had sent you a message where I had left off, and you were like, "Oh man,
yes.
last half hour is that last half hour," and I was pretty sure I knew what was going to happen, but I didn't know the extent to which the film was going to take it so seriously.
Yeah.
Because I already went on about the dance, and it's wonderful. And if you haven't seen it and you don't want to watch the movie because you feel like you know what the story is, you still need to watch that last half hour. You absolutely must watch that last half hour. I implore you. Yeah. It is stunning to watch. It's staggering to see how much they could do with what you think and then they turn it into this. It's just wonderful. But anyway, the performance of Ganga in that last half hour is like a masterclass in how to be unhinged and how to look like you know what you're doing and also look like you're somebody else and still yourself and totally afflicted yet well within your rights and being murderous. Like the fact that right before that all happens, we get Mohanlal delivering that information to the priest, which is another fantastic thing the movie did, because it kind of gives you that idea that he's going to be at odds with this priest, that they're going to be against one another. And when they go and have a private conversation, he's like, "Hey, I got your back. Anything you need from me." It's like, okay.
Yeah, that was great.
Great.
That
was really cool. Because then you get to have your cake and eat it too. Then you can have psychiatry and you can have tantra. And it can all be this amazing set dressing that eventually delivers us with that actual axe dropping third act. Where we know there is a very good likelihood that the husband is going to die. And it isn't until that flip switch that the body rolls over and she actually gets to cut the neck constantly. And Mohanlal delivering the news to his friend, like, she's going to be so psychotic that even if she survives this, she may cut you so deeply in your heart that you might not be able to forgive her. And a part of me wished that we had kind of seen that. And whatever, I'm glad we got a happy ending. But the 2023 me was like, ooh, wouldn't that be nice? or like an interesting way to tell the story where he did, be like, I can't be with you anymore because I watched you kill me. But the ebb and flow of all of that. And we had talked earlier about how like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is very much the like, ooey woo, spooky tantra, we're gonna rip your heart out, and it's almost more a caricature of what you might expect. And here it's actually used to provide protection. It's used to provide help. It's used to provide a way for two different cultures and two different beliefs to come together to ultimately end up with a really good result for somebody who may have otherwise died. And I was so pleasantly surprised by the way that all unfurled, and that, kind of cool, like, oh, we're gonna flip, like magician trick, but it still worked. Like, you can think, when did he have time to set that up? Who was helping him? Like, where's the scene of all the people in construction being like, should we put some more bags of potato on this to make sure that this thing flips the way that we want? And who made the dummy? Like, who made that guy? You could think about all that stuff, but you don't.
Yeah.
You think about that later, because in the moment, the movie's got you. The movie's got you, and it is carried 1,000% in a movie with Mohanlal, who is doing a wonderful, amazing misdirect, keeping himself level and revealing. He's just proving why he is a legend. In a movie with him in it, this woman playing Ganga wipes the floor with everyone who had previously been on the screen, and you are in shock, in awe that she can do that so well. Because moments later, when she wakes up and she's fine, it's all gone. It's all gone. It's just an innocent woman. And it is just a masterclass in acting from that region, a masterclass in filmmaking from that region. Any other issues that you might have had with the movie prior to that, whether it be, where is the perspective that I'm supposed to pay attention to? Or is this a little too funny for its own good? All of those ills are cured in that last half hour. Spectacular.
Yeah. No, the ending is absolutely fantastic. And I think there's one scene before the ending that I really liked, which I think of as almost like a teaser. The scene where the husband, Nakulan, is actually confronting Ganga and he's basically telling her, like, you can't go out. And you just see her performance. Oh my God, that performance was so good. The way, I don't know if they're doing any voice modulation or something like that. Her voice is completely different.
I don't think she is. Because that would be difficult to do in the 90s.
Of course,
that's very difficult to do in the 90s.
So I don't know how it's just performance, I guess. Just her voice, she was able to make her voice that much different, which is crazy.
And she did the thing where she lifts the bed, right? Because Mohanlal almost has that like toss away line of like, she'll be very strong, and she even lifts the bed, which is why she can take those doors in the earlier scene and like push them out. And it just, I'm glad you brought that scene up, because that is the scene that really tees you up for how wild it's going to get by the end.
Yeah. So that's why I mentioned it's a bit of like a teaser to sort of what we're going to get, because it's just there for a moment, but you just see her face, her voice, how she's completely, it's a scary moment. Like I would say, especially obviously being a bit older, it doesn't necessarily scare me like that. But I think, watching this as like a young child, maybe 14, 15 years old, and seeing that, you'd be pretty blown away in the 90s to see something like that from an industry that's not that rich in horror. It's like, whoa, this is completely different. And what she's doing is completely unique to anything that we have seen here. There's not much that we can rely on. There's no references. This is the source. You know
what it reminds me of? It reminds me of in the Fellowship of the Ring, when Bilbo and Frodo meet each other again after not having seen each other for a long time. And he's like, oh, my old ring. And he's like, no, I think I'll keep it. And he gets in with that, nobody.
Yes.
I vividly remember being in the theater when that scene happened, and every single person did one of these. Like, the hell? Like, we weren't expecting that. Especially not from somebody who we thought was safe, right? And that, like you said, it perfectly tees us up for, this is how terrible the ring is going to be, and this is how terrible this affliction is. Again, when you start thinking about it, especially from a modern perspective, from a 2023 perspective, well, how are we going to be able to have such a deeply specific psychosis? And the film did a good work early on, kind of giving us the montage of her youth and explaining why this may have happened to her, right? So we have a framework for it. But looking at it now, I don't know if we could get that specific, but then you look at your Hollywood comparisons, and it's a favorite trick of Hollywood. You got Primal Fear, you got more recently Split, where James McAvoy is 17, 18 different people, right?
Yep.
And all of these things are, psychotic, and they also have different powers. But you also think about stories of possessions where people did speak different languages, but they may have been exposed to those languages when they were younger, and it just kind of like fires up a different part of the brain when they're going through maybe an epileptic episode or something, so I don't know. I can't fault that though, because psychology in the 90s was, oh, you're a different person now, and I got to get that out of you. But I did love that instead of it just being, you've got a demon in you, no, it is your mind, and I need to take it. Right? We need to treat this. What was Mohanlal's treatment throughout the whole movie? I don't know. No idea what his actual treatment was. But
I think
it's undeniable that by the end he was doing something, and we get, especially right before the scene you just brought up where he tells the husband, like, hey, go talk to her. And that's specifically to bring it out, right? So that the husband knows definitively this is happening and these are the stakes. So it was there. It just is more like he had surreptitiously done stuff in the background.
Yeah.
And just because the movie didn't explicitly state that to me, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because where we land is wonderful. And that's where I wanted it to be anyway, even though I didn't know it.
No, exactly right. I think Mohanlal, that's an interesting point how they don't really show the treatment specifically, because I think in Hollywood adaptations or maybe more a Western perspective would have been like, let's actually have a sit-down room and therapy session or something that I think that might be the most obvious way to do it. I think the way they present Mohanlal is really, really good in this because they show him as a very unconventional character in general, right? Like his intro scene is hilarious, by the way, how he's just grabbing everybody. Yeah. It's hilarious. But essentially what this movie did with Mohanlal is they showed him off to be a pretty unconventional kind of doctor, So his methods were, take her to the temple and let's see if something's bored out in her. He tries a few different methods to try and get this affliction out of her because he acknowledges and knows the complexities of this and how even in the 90s, this would have been pretty unknown how to even treat this, So of course with the lens now, as you said, there's modern adaptations like The Split's a good one with that one. M. Night Shyamalan, Kerala background as well. So here we go again with that sort of inspiration. But in terms of like how he treats it, it's not exact because I think there's a lot of unknown and even he's figuring out as he goes, which I appreciated. Like they're like, we don't know how this is going to be fixed. Let's just make the protagonist, Mohanlal, also not know and take all these different kinds of paths to try and fix it. And he comes to the end that this is what's happened. She's stuck in some kind of tale. Yes, probably some of it's dramatized with the whole, how much you can do. But I thought Mohanlal was really good. But as you said, the performance, I just want to talk a little bit more about the dancing scene. One, the choreography is absolutely amazing in the dancing itself.
Real.
Like, it is captivating to see that. And like, I think the point where it's going really well and then they bring the other dancer in and it's like, whoa, this is another dynamic now.
The absolute matchup of the movements. And that's where I was saying, like, the juxtaposition of the real dancing and what was happening in the real world and his performance, where he's just a scared man. And then you see him, just absolutely in sync with this beautiful woman was so haunting to see. So haunting to see.
Yeah, it was but really, yeah, that's right. That it played the contrast so well just between, and of course her, I mean, not just her performance, but just the way they made her look. I think something about, like, if I compare her with a lot of the other dancers, because I've seen a compilation of all the several different dancers that sort of did this at the end. I think with her specifically, the way she's looking, I don't know if it's just because of her build, sort of tall and lanky. The other ones are a bit more shorter and plumpy, and they have that kind of, I don't know if they have that fear in them. Like, she looks scary at times.
Yeah.
With with her hair all in mess.
Yeah, the hair. And that's the other cool thing about the camera work is that it'll show you the hair in the real world is messed up. Like it's all done up, but it's messed up. And her eyes are a little bit messed up and she's sweating, maybe like me, because it's an 85 degree Fahrenheit day here and I'm in a hot booth. But she's sweating a little bit and she looks deranged and her eyes, that was one of my favorite things is they kind of showed you the change in the eyes, and I think that we even get when Mohanlal is talking about the scene where he confronted her about the anklets. I think there was even an eye change there, to kind of really pin the point home that like, this is happening and it's happening in a big bad way. But something I completely forgot to talk about up to now, and I had even messaged you about it, was I was like, oh, there's a love triangle.
Yes, that's right.
And we're setting up a second love triangle. So I was under the assumption, knowing what happens to the spirit that is in the house, that the same thing was going to happen to Ganga, and that was going to bring the possession out, right? So she was now going to be entranced and in love with the neighbor, and she was going to create it in the real world now. That's what I thought was going to happen. And in one way, we kind of get that. We have the scene where she's attacking him, but trying to make it look like he was trying to attack her. So we get a little bit of that, but I was certain that was going to be a major plot line in the movie, right? Like a psychological break between her and her husband. We didn't get that. But I actually think that was a beautiful misdirect by the movie to be like, hey, look over here. Of course that's going to happen. So that in the background, Mohanlal can be doing his thing, and we're not thinking about why he's doing what he's doing. Right? I think. But I really enjoyed that aspect, that I was really wrong. I was certain that was going to come to play, and it did not.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for tricking me. I love to be tricked.
Yeah, no, I think it was a smart decision because I think they had already. I mean, this movie, they pack in quite a bit. It feels like the story itself is pretty complex. So to add another layer on top of that, to be like, an affair happening through something like that, it might have been a little bit too much to sort of get, put into this movie. And it's already like a 2.5 hour movie. So they've sort of stretched the time. Yes, you could probably say some of the earlier scenes could have been cut down and things like that, but they were probably there for more. At the end of the day, I think Indian movies, and especially around this time period, they were more like family-friendly movies in a way. So to get the whole family involved, that's the sort of pieces you might need to get people involved that aren't into the horror part. Like, I remember the comedy parts because I love that performance, or something like that. But yeah, just towards the end, even like you mentioned before, how unhinged she is. I mean, I absolutely love that. It's just such a great contrast. And the thing that blows me away about this whole performance is this is like, again, the original. So she didn't have, I don't know how many what sources of inspiration she would have had. All the other remakes I've made been after this have all relied on all these characters that have been portrayed here. So I just thought it was really well done. And yeah, just the way she just absolutely loses herself. And the stuff she's even saying, I think it would make it more impactful if you understood the actual language. But she's saying something like, I want to kill you and drink your blood.
And drink your blood. Yeah.
I was like,
which, the amount of times that she says that is actually very indicative of the actual stories of possession that I've heard, where like, it's very likely that if she had heard that stuff, I want to kill you and drink your blood, that may be the one phrase in the language that she knew, which inspired her to learn more, right? So she might have heard the story about the legend, knew that one phrase, but it's a typical thing that pops up. So like if you listen to stories about other exorcisms, especially those people that all of a sudden speak a different language, they'll use one phrase over and over and over again because it's usually epilepsy or it's usually, some other actual affliction in the brain, and it's like a misfire. Right. So it's almost like Tourette's in that way. So even though she says it a lot, that's actually quite accurate, at least as far as everything that I've heard about, what happens in real possessions.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that was actually kind of fascinating because it's terrifying, right? You're not in control of it. And she did a spectacular job of showing that she wasn't in control of it. Just regurgitating that and hitting with that sword over and over and over again. And like, absolutely decimating the audience who at that time, so knowing what you said, we want it to be a family-friendly movie. At that time, you watched this woman who you believed was a sweet, innocent woman who had just moved into a house that she shouldn't be in, legitimately cut and decimate somebody's neck and then spread the blood all over her head, right? If you're a 12-year-old child in India at the time, you've got nightmares for years. Guaranteed.
Yeah. Definitely no. It's a very iconic scene. It's a very iconic moment. I think it's an iconic movie. I think what they've done here is completely unique. You would be happy to know, man. She won some awards for this movie, apparently. I think she won
Great.
I think it's the National Award, which is probably similar to the Oscars. I think from what other conversations I've had with people on this channel in the comment section itself, have sort of mentioned that she won the award for this one. And another piece of trivia, you'd be interested to know this one. The director of this movie, his name is Fazil. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because it's Fahid Fazil's father. Fahid Fazil was
Joji. Shit. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so Joji's father, basically. So this guy's a legendary director, and obviously this must be one of his best pieces of work. I would love to know some other movies Tom is in the comment section. Leave some other suggestions that are like this. We'd love to sort of know.
Yeah. Please hit. And again, thank you all for suggesting stuff like this, right? Because to me, this seemed like the way I revere certain things from America as like a cultural symbol and kind of flag that was planted in the ground. Jurassic Park, obviously, for America in 1993, kind of cemented what cinema was eventually going to become.
Yeah.
And I truly feel like this movie must have done that in that region as well,
Yep.
because it is just a plethora of things to enjoy, a plethora of topics to get into, right? Like, so I talk about how Jurassic Park inspired me to learn and inspired me to want to learn and inspired me to be creative. And I can see that exact same thing happening to people directly after watching this movie. Maybe you're interested in psychology. Maybe you're interested in dance. Maybe you're interested in archaeology. Maybe you're interested in old structures. Maybe you're interested in this culture versus this culture. Because all of these things painted broadly with this really cool exploded story with an absolutely banger third act is ultimately so many things to get us to that point. And if you're young watching this movie, odds are you were terrified, but then intrigued. And I'm happy that happened to you.
Definitely. I think it was not just within the region, but I think it would have, because obviously the Malayalam film industry been so influential across all of Indian cinema. So this must have, as I mentioned, it's been remade, but also just some of the stuff they've done in this movie must have carried throughout the entire country. I believe so. So yeah, that's
how many
a great
remakes
point.
did you say? I mean,
I think it's been remade.
Just
in
look
5,
at that.
Yeah, like 5. I think it's so. There's Hindi, there's Kannada, there's Tamil, Telugu, and I think even Bengali, which is a bit of a different sort of area altogether. So interesting, man. Yeah, fantastic movie. I think we've probably touched on even some comparisons. Were there any other comparisons that you had for this movie?
The only other one that, and I'm glad you asked, From Hell was another one that I really thought about.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? So the entire movie, you're following a character who you think is helping out the main character, who at the end turns out to be somebody who is suffering from a psychological condition that makes him look possessed, and he's Jack the Ripper, right?
Yep.
So those types of movies. And again, it was like a very popular kind of convention to play with because we were just starting to learn about the mind back then. And we believed that, and it actually can do spectacular things. But Primal Fear, Split, and From Hell were the first 3 that really came to mind. But that one was more recent. And then The Haunting of Hill House.
Haunting House, yeah.
Specifically, the bent neck lady and everything that goes on there. Again, if you haven't seen it, you need to watch at least all the episodes up to the bent neck lady episode for the context to really hit. It is legitimately scary, but it is a beautiful, touching, tender, sweet story that by the end, you can't believe was ever scary. It is a masterwork. Probably the best thing in the horror genre I've ever watched, bar none. It's wondrous. But those are my other comparisons. What about you? Did you have others?
I think, you mentioned The Split, which is a modern one, which was just because of multiple personality disorder one. The only other one that I thought of, which would be interested to get your take, was a bit of Black Swan. With the whole,
absolutely.
Obviously the dancing, that's one thing, but obviously more than the dancing, the deterioration
the
of the
psychosis,
character.
Right? Yeah.
Going psycho. So that was the other one that I thought of. Otherwise, the Hitchcock movies that I had said before, with Psycho and Vertigo specifically, I think they're both the 2 that I think probably had. Vertigo, I think, is quite similar, actually. It also has some possession of some cabaret dancer or something like that, if I'm remembering it correctly. So, there's some comparisons. But honestly, even though there was comparisons, this movie still felt pretty unique in itself, I felt.
It's very unique,
it was,
right?
Yeah.
Like, we had talked about John Carpenter and Sam Raimi.
Yes.
So obviously you could see things like Halloween, slow moving kind of camera from the person's perspective, or Sam Raimi's early work in the first Evil Dead, which again is another movie that has like a cultural significance that means it's been remade and rebooted and revamped dozens of times. Right. And I think there is something so compelling about that. Like, what happens if you're looking at somebody 1 second and you turn around and now they're not who they were? So much so that they will try to kill you. And you don't really need to know whether or not that's supernatural or whether or not that is something psychological, because it's still terrifying. It doesn't matter, right? Like, it still will leave you shaking in your boots and make you feel like somebody might cut your neck with a sword and put their blood on your blood on their forehead. So I mean, I'm sure there are dozens of other comparisons, but this one being specifically shown through the cultural lens that it was a absolute blast to watch. And I say blast because I had fun, right? Like, I was intrigued, but at this point, especially knowing that we were doing a movie from 1993, it could have been a slog, could have been boring, could have gotten caught up in the production value and the score and the music not being up to today's standards. But you just chuck it all away, absolutely fall in love with some powerhouse performances, and see a great story. Maybe an uneven film, but a great story.
Definitely. No, it's been a really good one, and this has been an awesome conversation, Doug. Really, really enjoyed it. Before I get your final take about this movie, man, a special mention to Arjun Warrior. I think you've recommended this movie maybe 3 times, something like that, and I'm really glad you did, mate. Like movies like this really break us apart from, doing sort of the regular releases or the modern stuff, and it gives Doug, even myself, especially, a different perspective on cinema and understanding, sort of, the flagpole moments I think you mentioned, or the iconic movies of the industry. So that's fantastic. So thank you so much. Any other recommendations? Please let us know.
Please.
Yeah, we definitely have got a lot of good recommendations. So please keep sending them across. But I'll get on to the final part, man. The D scale. Where does this finally land on your D scale? Where do you rate this, Doug?
It's easily dynamite. And I don't want to say like high dynamite or low dynamite, but I will give it this clarifier. When I was young, the VHSs that my family had collected were in this like kind of cabinet, right? And you could pull it out. And the most used VHSs, the ones that we loved the most, were toward the front. And then the ones that we really liked or were pretty intriguing were in the middle. And then the ones that we were like, once on a blue moon would be toward the back. Yeah, this one would be in the middle. Dynamite right there. Nice.
Yeah. I'm probably on the same boat as you. I think it's probably I'd say probably high dynamite for myself. I really did like this movie. And the fact that it's very memorable. That's the thing about this movie. Like, as I said, I'd seen the remake and the story is still in my head. Like, it was that good that the story itself, was enough for me to not forget what exactly happened in this movie. So I think that itself is pretty impressive. It's not a forgettable movie. You sort of seem to remember a lot of stuff. It
certainly is not, man. I'll be thinking about that dance sequence coming back to real life and then back to the dance. I will be thinking about that for weeks. That was stunning.
That was impressive. Just honestly, I think I mentioned before, we could do a whole episode on just that. Like some of her facial expressions as well. I won't talk about it more, but yeah, it was really, really, really impressive. But yeah, so probably a high dynamite. Really enjoyed it for myself. So glad to do it. And Doug, this has been absolutely awesome, man. I love doing this kind of movie.
Amazing as always. Yeah. I know you were definitely like, this is gonna be a weird one. I like weird, man. I like it. I like it all. Send it my way. I'll find a reason to understand what the artists who put together were trying to show me. I will absolutely do that. And we take all the recommendations very seriously. I echo what Amit said. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you.
Awesome, guys. Well, thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Awesome, man. That was one.